Hi students, today we're going to remember how to factor. We're going to specifically look at guess and check in this video. Let's start with a more basic example where the lead coefficient is just a 1 here. Notice I gave you the answer to this problem. That was not a mistake. The reason I did this is because I think it's helpful to kind of look at the end to figure out where factoring comes from. Just as a reminder, factoring is when you take an expression, or a trinomial like this, and you break it up into two factors like these here, that when you multiply these, they would give you the original expression. Okay, so our goal is to work backwards and find out what these binomials are. Okay, so if you're looking at this problem, we're trying to break it into two factors. Now, this is the reverse of FOILing. So normally when you FOIL, you start with your first terms. X times x gives you x squared. For factoring, you want to do this backwards. We already have the x squared. Now we want to ask ourselves what two factors multiply to be x squared. And since I already gave you the answer, we know that this is x and x, but we would know that otherwise, of course. Okay, the reason coefficient 1 is a little bit easier is because there's only one thing that multiplies to be x squared. It's always x and x. Okay, so if we continued FOILing our answer, thinking in the reverse, we would do our outers and our inners. So our outers give us 4x, our inners give us negative 11x. And notice that these are not terms in the original problem, so I'm going to save those for last. Okay, so we did our outers and our inners. Now we need to do our last terms. So negative 11 times 4 gives us negative 44. And that's where this term comes from. Okay, so I'm going to skip that negative 7x, and I'm going to go with this negative 44. When you're factoring, you have to ask yourself, what's going to multiply to give me this last term? Okay, so there's a lot of things that multiply to be 44. I like to make a list. I recommend you do until you get really comfortable with factoring. It could be 1 and 44, 2 and 22, 4 and 11. So you should be noticing that there could be multiple things that work to multiply to negative 44. Okay, but there can only be one correct factorization. So that's where this negative 7 comes in. When we add this negative 11 and this 4 together, if you were combining like terms, that's where the negative 7x comes from. So although there are multiple factors of 44, we have to find the one that adds this middle term. And since we know the answer and we kind of worked out the math, we know that's 4 and 11. Last step, you need to decide what signs you're going to use. Okay, so I want to add to be a negative 7 and multiply to be a negative 44. So it has to be a negative and a positive to multiply to be a negative. And the bigger one has to be negative to make sure it adds to a negative 7. Okay, and that's where this factorization comes from, which should match our answer here. I want you all to keep in mind that this is called guess and check. Now, normally I always check my answers. The only reason I didn't is because we already kind of FOILed out the answer that was given to us. So make sure in the future you check your answers, and I will show you why in a bit. Now we're going to look at a little bit more challenging example. The reason it's more challenging is because the lead coefficient is not a 1, which may pose problems, as you will see in a minute. Okay, so we need to figure out what multiplies to be 3x squared first, and that will go in our first slots here. And the only answer for this one is 3x and x, so still not too bad. Okay, now we want to figure out what multiplies to 12, and it's going to add to negative 20. So I'm going to list out my factors of 12. It could be 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4, and I believe that is all. Now we have to take this list and decide which one's going to add to negative 20. The reason this problem is a little bit trickier is because if you do your outers and your inners when you FOIL, one of your factors here is going to have to multiply with 3. So it's not as directly obvious which one's going to add to 20 like it was in this first one when it just multiplied with a 1 here. So this is where we have to actually guess and check, hence where the name comes from. So let's just say I pick factors of 3 and 4, because those are my favorite, no other reason. And in order to multiply to a positive and add to a negative, both terms would have to be negative. So there's my guess. Now I got to check. Here the outers will give us negative 12, and the inners will give us negative 3. If you add those together, we're going to get negative 15. And since that's not negative 20, my guess is not going to work. Okay, so I might want to try a different set of factors. Let's say I picked 6 and 2. Okay. We got to guess and then check, of course. So my outers are going to give us negative 6x. My inners are also going to give us negative 6x. And again, that doesn't work because it gives us a negative 12. Okay, now instead of trying another set of factors, sometimes you may have to just change up where they're located and see if that works. So instead of multiplying the 2 with the 3, maybe I multiply the 6 with the 3 because it'll give us a bigger number. Okay, I'm thinking in my head how I need to adjust this. So let's try this. My outers here will give us a negative 18x, which is a little bit bigger, and my inners will give us a negative 2x, and if you add those together, you are going to get that negative 20. Okay, so my checking comes from making sure 3x and x multiply to 3x squared. My last terms multiply to positive 12, which with the signs they do. And then when you do the outers and inners, if you were foiling this and you combine like terms, you should get negative 20, which with this factorization we do, which means we're done guessing and checking. Okay, so guess and check is a really great method because it's very intuitive, but there are other methods as well, which we will talk about in other videos. Okay, so please come with questions and have a good rest of your night.